Hey everybody, back with you again for part 2 of husband and wife roles and needs. So we're in Vertical Marriage chapter 6 and doing part 2 of this session. As we mentioned before, at the end of each chapter there are discussion questions. So if you're doing this video series as a premarital couple, even a married couple, at the end of each chapter there's a discuss together section where there's different scriptures to read, different questions to ask, to discuss between yourselves and or discuss it with us if you're doing the online counseling with us, or with a pastor if you're doing it with a different location with a pastor or a mentor, something like that. So every section has discussion questions at the end of it. So we're going to continue today just for a few minutes and talk about this headship and submission concept, which is very biblical. We looked last session about the husband having the responsibility to lead, and really as a man we really feel the provider protector role really strongly. That's a part of our headship, a part of our presiding over our home. Again, as I mentioned last session, it's not about being the boss, it's being the servant leader. But provider protector really weighs heavy, I think, in a man's heart. Because God is our provider, but a man needs to work. And again, I always use the 80-20 rule. It's not wrong if a wife makes 3 times what her husband could make in a job, and she's the primary worker and breadwinner, and he's more in a supportive role. Maybe he helps with childcare. We've seen that over the years work successfully with couples. So it's not just one way to do it. It's whatever works for you. But generally, the man is going to be the provider and also the protector. So, we want to work, make enough money, make sure we're supplying what the home needs, and also be the protector. So, if you're in bed at night and you hear a glass breaking and, oh my gosh, someone's just broke a window, they're coming into the house, the guy's going to be the one to get up, grab the baseball bat, or grab whatever other weapon he might have on hand, and be the protector of the home. So we're clearly called to be that. Okay, so we're to be the strong one, to bear the burden. The husband is the Christ figure in the home. So we're called to be like Christ, to love our wives like Christ loves the church. So we are the Christ figure, we are the burden bearer, we are the protector in our homes. So headship and submission. And I love pastor author John Piper greatly, does a great job of summarizing these concepts. And here's what he says, just quoting from Vertical Marriage here, that headship is the divine calling of a husband to take primary responsibility for Christ-like servant leadership, protection, and provision. Wow. If we're about doing that, seeking to do that, I've been trying to do that, in my life over the past 38 years of marriage, and it gets easier in a sense. Of course, we're empty nesters now, but we raised 3 children. We had a 4-year-old, or a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a newborn at one time. So we were busy. Parenting was on the front burner, and now it's a different season. But still, I'm seeking to give servant leadership, protection, provision, every way that I can. Submission, Piper says, is the divine calling of a wife to honor and affirm her husband's leadership and help carry it through according to her gifts. Now again, this is definitely a two-way street. It's not just all about the man's career, the man, coming into his gifts while the wife is on the sidelines as a cheerleader. It doesn't exclude the wife from also growing. As I mentioned last session, Ephesians 5:21, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So it's definitely a two-way street, but primarily in the context of Ephesians 5 that we're looking at, that is the wife's role. So a word of caution as far as what headship is not, okay? Headship, first of all, does not give the husband, unrestricted power, like veto power, like I'm the president of the house, I can veto whatever you want to do. No, that's not servant leadership. So he can't just act on his own without consulting his wife, making major decisions, making, parenting decisions or, life decisions without consulting his wife. Also, headship does not give the husband an excuse to withhold his heart. Hey, I'm the boss here, I'm the leader, you don't understand the pressure I'm under, I just can't talk right now, I'm busy, holding this thing together. I got duct tape, I got scotch tape, I'm just trying to keep us above water. Being the head of the house, being the leader, does not mean you can be emotionally detached. We are called to interact with our wives, again, the way Christ loves the church, pouring our hearts out to them, being a good friend to our wives. Also, being the head doesn't give the husband a pass on doing chores in the house, doing his share and bearing the family responsibilities, whatever they might be. He doesn't have, some high position where he's exempt from doing menial tasks, not at all. And finally, headship does not end. All throughout our married lives, and again, I mentioned, we're empty nesters right now, but still, my goals are the same. I want to, for as long as I'm married, I want to be a servant leader to my wife. And then just to clarify also with submission, and I love Piper's insights on this, submission does not mean agreeing with your husband on everything. Not at all. And so, we encourage premarital couples, and we'll talk more about this when we get to the conflict chapter, how to resolve conflict. You don't have to agree with your husband on everything. That's not, submission does not mean, well, whatever he says, he's the head of the house. No, not at all. Wives need to express their opinion, express their concerns in a respectful way. Husbands as well need to express in a respectful way to their wives. Also, submission does not mean leaving your brain at the altar, at the wedding altar. No. Men and women both have, God's created us to have brilliant minds and creativity and insights. And so husbands and wives are partnering together in a marriage. And we need to hear from our wives, right? Absolutely. So it doesn't mean that you don't think. That's ridiculous notion. Unfortunately, some of these concepts are played out in the culture, in your sitcoms or in your movies, and sometimes it's not a good example. So we can learn from that, like what not to do, right? Also, submission does not mean avoiding every effort to change a husband. Remember, best friends, which is what we're supposed to be, are honest with each other. So just because your husband, is the leader in the home and you want to support him, you need to bring to his attention prayerfully, pray about it first, bring to his attention areas where he needs to change or modify and confront him with those things. Absolutely. I'm glad my wife has done that with me over the years. And also, submission does not mean putting the will of your husband before the will of Christ. So again, we are to love him with our whole heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's the first and greatest commandment. So wives, husbands as well, we're following Christ. We're seeking Christ first, above all. And also, submission does not mean that a wife gets her personal and spiritual strength primarily through her husband. Not at all. I'm so glad that my wife, has her own prayer life. She studies the Word on her own. She listens to, different videos and teachings and gleans from all kinds of sources, always has over the years. I have as well. Sometimes they're the same sources. I mean, we were in church together for a long time. I was in pastoral ministry, in a conventional way for, 20 years. So yeah, a lot of the similar sources, but let's get over that notion that a wife has to come to her husband to check things out or to, hey, is this Bible verse okay for me to read, or something ridiculous like that. Submission does not mean that he's the disseminator of all the godly, spiritual insight. Not at all. We both need to be seeking the Lord and gleaning from him on our own. So that wraps up part 2. My wife's going to share in another session, and we'll see you next time. God bless.